Okay. Uh, So we're going to spend a couple of days going over what they call leveraging sourcing strategies. It's just more on ISM's version of a sourcing strategy. So leverage spend through identification, development, and execution of sourcing strategies. It's their task. So the first thing they want to go into is stakeholders and office politics with stakeholders. So there's a few different theories running around about stakeholders. So the traditional input-output model, the company converts inputs of investors, employees, and suppliers into saleable output, which customers buy, thereby returning capital to the company. This is what's known as the resource-based view for stakeholder definition. So using this model, companies only address issues concerning investors, employees, suppliers, or customers, which is how we've looked at it, for a long time. Then there's the traditional shareholder view, which is much narrower. And the shareholders or stockholders are the owners of the company. And the company puts their needs first with the goal of increasing value for them. This is what's called the market-based view or the stock market view. And you hear this kind of stuff on channels like CNBC and the other business stock market channels. And then they got a third one called the stakeholder view. And this is kind of where people are headed today. Integrates both the resource-based view as well as the market-based view. So it recognizes that there are other parties involved and affected by decisions of the company, then government groups, political groups, trade associations, unions, communities. A corporate stakeholder is then a party who affects or can be affected by the organization's action. So this view has a much wider view of who a stakeholder is. So now you want to analyze your stakeholders because you've included a bunch more. And this is one way you could do it. Evaluate the importance of the stakeholder, evaluate what kind of relationship you have with them, and evaluate levels of alignment and involvement. So evaluate importance. You're looking at the stakeholder to try to estimate the impact they will have on the project's success, whatever your project is, sourcing project or whatever. What relevant resources does each stakeholder influence? How does the stakeholder influence those resources? And what authority does the stakeholder have? And the second step is to evaluate the relationship. Who has positive influence on others, stakeholder-wise? Which individuals tend to be at odds with the group? And which relationships are strong, weak, or just lacking? So just kind of quantify the relationship with each of the stakeholders. And then the third level is to evaluate alignment and involvement. So determine the stakeholder group's alignment and involvement with the sourcing strategy. You know what you want to do for sourcing. Now how are each of your stakeholders going to view that strategy? Who will need to make it happen? Who will let it happen? Who needs information only? This is your basic RASI. Have strategies for handling all stakeholders been identified, or at least the big ones? And how do you align the different groups with the change process? So you want to identify the stakeholders' contribution to the project outcome. Ensures the right relationships are developed. You don't want to, it's not that you don't want to pay attention to every stakeholder, but some stakeholders are much more important than others. Avoid unexpected project delays, avoid planning of intervention activities to deal with roadblocks. Here's another way of looking at stakeholders. You got stakeholder power from low to high, and you got stakeholder interest from low to high. This is a lot like the Kralik matrix. So these guys have high stakeholder power and high interest. Those are your key players. And these guys have low stakeholder power and very little interest. Don't spend a lot of time on them. And keep these guys informed with high interest but low power. And keep these guys satisfied with low interest and high power. There's another way of looking at stakeholders. You got level of involvement from high to low. And you got against, for, and against the sourcing strategy. So using the size of the circle to denote the power of each group. Opponent cynics, fence sitters, change champions, etc. So fence sitters are if the bubble's here, opponents over here, willing helpers over here. I don't know where cynics and opponents fall. Cynics, I guess, are up here. Opponents are down here. Change champions. But as you can see, design engineering has a lot of influence on the sourcing strategy. So does materials. Plant operations, manufacturing, engineering a little bit, marketing a little bit less. But this is also another handy way you can kind of organize your stakeholders. The steering committee purpose is to develop an effective executive partnership and achieve a clear commitment to the project. So effective steering committee meetings during a project are critical. Not every project has a steering committee, only the really big ones. Set consistent expectations early and manage them. Establish a steering committee at the start of the project. Get the membership right. Agree on membership of the steering committee. Assure that the project manager is in full member of the steering committee and keep the committee membership to a manageable number. So if you're doing a sourcing strategy and it's a big change and it's very complicated, you might want to establish a steering committee with materials and engineering, but then it becomes less of a decision from purchasing, is more of a decision by committee, which some of the directors are not going to like. Opportunity assessment. So they have a process to go through the opportunity assessment. So you're looking at changing a source or a sourcing strategy, and then you want to do it. You want to assess that opportunity. First step is spend analysis. Historical spending patterns of the entire commodity. Types of items purchased, which plants, LPP, discrete PO, pricing difference between plants, spend data, historical raw material changes, historical productivity cost reductions, and then volume. So after you do the spend analysis, then you want to move to cost and price analysis. So usually done with the TCO, or total cost of ownership. How much does it cost to buy the thing and then acquire it, use it, support and maintain it? Usually TCOs are done with capital equipment. Should cost is something we use a lot. Comes from our teardown center or the Kenworth benchmarking, or Kenworth team over there. Oops. And they're basically reverse engineering the product and trying to come up with what a reasonable price would be to manufacture that part, given what it's made of and how it's made. Clean sheets are one step beyond a should cost. It's the theoretical best cost at which the product could be manufactured. So in order to do a clean sheet, you would do it with best-in-class technology, best lean manufacturing processes, cost advantage location, best-in-class labor rates. That's where you would say, okay, if everything goes right, this is what it should cost. This assumes the overhead structure of your supplier and doesn't assume you're going to change it. This assumes that the overhead structure is going to be best in class. Price analysis, we do this all the time in purchasing, getting 3 quotes, triangulating where the price should be. Then you've got risk analysis, which is third step. So purchasing must identify the risk, assess its likelihood and impact on the company if it were to occur. So you can group it into three main categories: availability, supply, cost, product application. Initial versus existing product. These are kind of weird, but this is an ISM thing. So market characteristics, which include global sourcing, capacity constraints, number of qualified suppliers, econ conditions, and price uncertainty. You're looking at the risks of all of those with your sourcing strategy. And then you got to look at each supplier. What are their capacity constraints, quality problems, cycle times. And if it's a new supplier, you might not have much of this data. And then recording risks. So there's a couple of ways you can do it. At PACCAR, we usually like to use the FEMA, failure modes effects analysis. And it looks like this. This comes from our engineering groups. Incorrect root cause, correct failure to meet customer requirements, then you got prevention, detection, to get some scoring going on. This is usually the preferred way that we do it. Although ISM has its own way. It's another spreadsheet. Looks pretty similar. Here's some guidance, a couple of tabs if you're interested. But all it's doing is the same thing, is it's recording it. This is called a heat map. So you plot it usually by risk severity and risk occurrence likelihood. So impact on this axis, likelihood that it'll occur on this axis. Try to stay out of the red. And then market analysis. Sourcing approaches are typically driven by market dynamics. What's the industry look like that you're sourcing from? Porter's 5 forces is the classic way to analyze this that you learned in business school. Supplier dynamics, evolution of technology, demand driven, buyer's position, etc. There's some other ones you can use, SCL, the structure, conduct, performance, SCP analysis, another one. But here's Porter's. There's some templates here that you can look at and some examples. And then the requirements analysis. Can you do any standardization or consolidation with your specs? Is there a standardized substitute? So here's what we just looked at, the ISM version of opportunity assessment: spend analysis, cost and price analysis, risk analysis, market, and requirements. All right. Which of the following methods identify savings opportunities in complex categories by applying a statistical should price method? What would be a should cost method? We just got covered Porter's 5 forces. That's an industry analysis, so that's not going to be should cost. And then risk analysis is not, that's something different. That's not should cost. So it's either supplier dynamics or cost regression analysis. Any guesses? It better be. What's that?
B?
Yeah, it better be cost regression analysis. Otherwise, I'll be mad at them. Let's see. Option D, yeah, cost regression analysis. It's another way of using simple regression. It's like LPP, linear performance pricing. That's just simple regression. All right, there's 5 questions out there. Why don't you guys go ahead and start working them, and we'll go over answers at 20 after. Or you just raise your hand, and when everybody gets done, we can move on to it. All right, you may not be finished, but let's go over some answers. And the answers are where? All right, number one is delta. Total cost of ownership is always everything. Everything involved with that part. Two is Bravo, which I disagree with, but first step in aligning stakeholders for the process is to determine their importance to the project, but I thought D would evaluating the levels of alignment and involvement would be determining importance. So I just don't like that one. Three is alpha. Standardizing and aggregating spend provides a summary of the amount spent by category. Four is Charlie. Risk item characteristics include availability of supply, cost, and production application. And five is Bravo. Once the spend dollars have been analyzed, the next step is to conduct cost or price analysis. All right, any questions? All right, we will finish up the section tomorrow. See you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.